As the year 1632 began, King Gustavus Adolfus of Sweden resumed his campaigns against the Holy Roman Empire. On the 10th of April, he stormed Donauwörth, the most westerly Bavarian fortress on the river Danube, and on the 12th he encountered General Tilly once again, behind heavy fortifications on the Lech River. Tilly had broken all the bridges within 30 miles of his position, and built large redoubts and trenches by which to secure his infantry and guns. However, in this fortification, Tilly was surrounded on two sides by the Lech and Danube rivers, and Gustavus believed he could use this fortification as a trap within which to destroy Tilly before turning his attentions to the newly reappointed General Wallenstein, who was raising new forces in Moravia with which to engage the Swedes. In order to bring his plan into action, Gustavus first had to keep Tilly's attention. He had his men build their own fortifications across the river, and his heavy cannon, now 72 strong from those captured at Breitenfeld, bombard the plains south of the imperial fortifications to prevent their withdrawal. On the night of the 13th, using a bend of the river for cover, Swedish pioneers constructed a bridge over which 300 Finnish soldiers crossed and set up a bridgehead. Tilly soon noticed these troops on his side of the river, but their small size and the continued fire of the Swedish guns deterred his taking any action against them. The following night, however, most of the Swedish forces crossed over, bringing some of their light guns with them. On the morning of the 15th, Tilly appreciated the position he was in, and hurled his forces at the Swedes in an attempt to dislodge them. The imperial position was hopeless, however, as the crossfire from Swedish cannon on both sides of the river tore through their desperate and poorly coordinated attacks. Over 4,000 imperial soldiers were lost before the merciless Swedish fire, including Tilly himself, who was struck by a cannonball and died some days later. The remaining imperial forces withdrew to their fortifications in disarray. Once again, though, despite his superb tactical success, Gustavus failed to exploit his victory. The Swedish king failed to detain the 20,000 or so survivors, who were able to retreat east the following day and join the forces being raised by Wallenstein. Gustavus compounded his errors by ravaging Bavaria in an attempt to draw Wallenstein to battle. But Wallenstein had more sense than to directly engage the tactically superior Gustavus. Instead, he moved his forces through Saxony to threaten the Swedish supply train. This move once again left the road to Vienna wide open, but once again Gustavus was afraid to take it. Instead, fearing the loss of his supplies, he opted to move to Nuremberg and entrench, hoping to provoke a battle from Wallenstein. The imperial commander, however, knew he had the advantage in such a situation and entrenched nearby, content to let the Swedes sit there and starve. After 6 weeks of inaction, Gustavus ordered a frontal assault on Wallenstein's position at the Alta Vesta. The extensive imperial fortifications nullified the Swedish fire advantage and stymied their attack, which was repulsed at the loss of over 4,000 men. Many of the Swedes were cut down by imperial cavalry as they attempted to withdraw under the withering hail of shot, and were it not for the timely intervention of the experienced Swedish cavalry, Gustavus' entire army could have been massacred. Following this disaster, Gustavus withdrew, and finally marched on Vienna on the 18th of September, still vainly hoping to draw Wallenstein to battle. Again, the canny imperial commander refused to take the bait, and instead began to despoil the lands of Saxony. Gustavus again became more concerned about his lines of communication than the capture of the enemy's capital, and turned his forces around. He managed to march 165 miles in 18 days, and finally achieved the battle he had been hoping for. On the 16th of November 1632, Gustavus caught Wallenstein's forces at Lutzen, a few miles southwest of Leipzig. The perfidious Elector of Saxony withdrew his forces and refused to help his erstwhile ally, leaving Gustavus to face down the superior imperial forces alone. Wallenstein arrayed his 17,000 men into 4 immense tercios, with cavalry on either flank and cannon to his right and centre. His line stretched for almost 2 miles along the raised road above the plains, with one flank anchored by the Flossgraben stream, the other by the town of Lutzen. Wallenstein was crucially awaiting reinforcements. He hoped that the arrival of fresh troops during the battle would shatter the Swedes. Gustavus opposed him with his remaining 18 to 19,000 men. These he arrayed much as he had at Breitenfeld, infantry in the centre supported by their light guns, and heavy guns to the fore, with cavalry guarding either flank. When the morning mist cleared, Gustavus personally led the cavalry of his right wing to smash into the Imperials. His first rank of infantry also advanced into the teeth of determined Imperial fire. The cavalry struggle on the flank went well initially, but in the smoke and confusion, Gustavus became separated from his men. Riding on regardless, he soon found himself in the rear of the Imperial positions with only 3 companions. There the king was discovered by a party of Imperial cavalry, and despite his efforts to fight his way clear, had his horse shot from under him, and along with 2 of his companions was cut down. Whilst the vengeful Germans looted the king's body, his remaining companion made his way safely back to the Swedish lines to tell them of their loss. As word of their king's death circulated, far from being deterred, the Swedish forces became enraged. Whilst their first line of infantry had been driven back, the Swedish centre reformed and engaged the tercios with extreme violence. The fight raged for several hours, but the immense Swedish superiority in fire began to tell, and the Imperial line began to buckle. Sometime after midday, Pappenheim, whose premature charge had initiated the Battle of Breitenfeld, arrived with reinforcing Imperial cavalry. These initially pushed back the Swedes on the right flank, but the fight soon degenerated into a wild melee, and Pappenheim was killed by a stray cannonball. The Swedish cavalry advantage in being trained for close combat began to show, and Pappenheim's forces collapsed. As the day progressed, the Swedish infantry brought their fire advantage to bear, and forced the Imperial centre ever more backwards. This allowed the Swedes to overrun the centre of Imperial defence, their artillery. Once again, the Imperial forces found themselves under fire from their own guns as well as those of the Swedes. This was finally too much to bear, and the vast tercios collapsed in the face of determined and effectively directed firepower. Although they had brought down around 5,000 enemy soldiers, the Swedes made no effort to pursue. With the death of Gustavus, Sweden lost any further interest in the wars, which ground on for a further 16 years and resulted in over 8 million deaths. The devastation of Germany was unparalleled. Of the 35,000 villages in the Bohemia of 1618, for example, only 6,000 survived in 1648. The total humbling of Germany left a power vacuum into which the Sun King of France, Louis XIV, was happy to step. Louis ascended the throne on the 14th of May 1643. A mere 5 days later, the French army smashed the Spanish at the Battle of Rocroi, finally breaking the reputation of the Spanish tercio as the dominant force in European wars. The meteoric rise of Catholic France that followed Louis's victories at the end of the 30 Years' War was to destabilise Europe for over half a century to come. The failure of King Gustavus Adolphus to maximise upon his victories in no part invalidates the brilliance of his tactical mind. Through the adoption of new tactics and improvement upon the works of others, he was able to create an army that amazed the world with its flexibility and power. Despite Sweden's subsequent rapid decline in importance, the developments of Gustavus Adolphus were perhaps the greatest influence upon European warfare for the next 2 centuries.